William Wallace, thanks very much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Is it still worth it to get into cybersecurity in 2024?
I would say so, but for a lot of people, it depends on how much they're willing to put in.
So you can't just drop that off and then
Yeah.
not
All
expand
right.
on it.
So I'll give you a little context. For a lot of my life, especially early on in my college career, I was already getting started in a lot of professional work, especially regarding getting an actual job, not just doing simple retail work, but breaking into cybersecurity through the very first step I recommend almost everyone take, which is getting through an IT job. Because when you get into
So when I asked you if 2024 is still a year where you would like to, possibly just get into cybersecurity, you mentioned that it depends, and I asked you to expand on it.
Mhm.
And you mentioned it's whatever you put in. So if you don't mind, just give us a quick meaning of what that is. What do you mean by putting the time in?
Sure. So, especially nowadays, a lot of people talk about the job market being very terrible, especially for people trying to get into cybersecurity. And a lot of the times when I see those same posts talking about it, they come from people who seem to only put in the bare minimum. They'll get the Security Plus exam, they'll maybe take another certification, they'll do a couple boxes on Hack the Box, they'll do very minimal stuff to just show that they kind of get it and they've done the very attractive part of cybersecurity, especially into red teaming or pen testing, but they won't do much more than that. So a lot of times they'll maybe get a college degree and they'll think, oh, I don't have a job yet. I don't know what's going on. It must just be the job market. It's not me. And that's true to an extent. But especially for myself, I had to really do substantially more than what other people were doing. And that meant getting started in my professional career very early on in my college life. So I had started college back in 2018, and already in 2020, I was already doing a job as an IT help desk guy. And the reason you need to start in IT, especially if you're getting started in tech and at all, if you want to get into cyber, is because IT really helps you not only get the foundational knowledge with computers, with the concept of basic security concepts, but also helps you understand how to talk to people and how to do basic problem solving, because those kinds of skills will be able to help you in the long run, especially when it comes to do more sophisticated problem solving if you're ever going to be in a pen tester role. So because I had such a massive head start in my college career, I was able to immediately leverage that and get somewhere around 2 or 3 internships in cybersecurity already by the time I was still a senior in college. And when I was already an offensive security engineer for one of the companies I worked for previously, I was still halfway into college and only halfway into the last semester, before already finally graduating. So it takes a lot more than what most people I've seen are willing to put in. And it's only if you're already doing so much more, like showing off that you've done kinds of personal projects, creating a website, putting a bunch of projects on your GitHub portfolio, being very active with people on LinkedIn or in person through events like B-Sides or DEF CON or all kinds of things like that. Those really go a long way into showing people that not only you're so serious about this, but you actually have what it takes to survive and be able to thrive in cybersecurity. So that's what I mean by it depends.
Yeah, and William, I mean the advice you just gave, I guess you can apply that to almost anything in your life.
hmm
Doing that
That's
extra plus
yeah,
one.
that's on purpose.
Yeah. So and it's super interesting because you're right. A lot of people going through the certification process or the degree process, and then the one thing, first of all, first and foremost in cybersecurity, things are moving so quickly where if you don't keep up to date in terms of your skill set, the odds are you're going to be outdated within 6 to 12 months at the most.
hmm
And so, what's what's behind the drive? What made you be so driven? I know, and listen, I got young kids. I would love to have them share some of that passion with. And it doesn't really matter to me what it is, but what's behind the drive? Anything in your childhood or anything that in your background that made you so proactive about being successful?
That's exactly what it was. First off, I came from a parenting that was very diligent. They made sure that I would do all the stuff on time. I'll do my homework on time. I had a very good mother. I very appreciate that. So she instilled those core values into me, into making sure I was very diligent. I was very disciplined, and I would do things, the right things when I needed to and how I needed to do it correctly. But that's just a small part of it. The bigger part that actually got me oriented into cybersecurity was when I had started watching some YouTube videos back in middle school. So there was a YouTuber I saw, I don't know if he's still active. His name was, I think, Rogue Amp, and another one was Dan Oct 1 or something. They were both showing off kinds of malware that would be prevalent on systems like Windows 95 or Windows 2000, Windows XP, those very early, old age kinds of viruses. And sometimes they would either be very benign and just goofy, or they would be very catastrophic and be the ones that would go on to cause millions of dollars in damages to big companies like Microsoft. So having them not only show off the destructive capabilities of these kinds of viruses, but go into more detail about their history, who created them, if they were ever found out, the kinds of techniques they take, and then showing a real example of it running on an actual computer or a virtual machine. Seeing those things take place and understanding how these things worked was both really cool to me, especially given that factor of they caused Microsoft to pay millions of dollars in damages, but it was also really scary because that meant if it could happen to a big company like Microsoft, it could happen to someone as small as me who didn't even know how to use a computer that well yet. So that really got me passionate about it, is seeing that that kind of capability exists from something as small as at the time like a kilobyte, maybe even less. So that at that point, that's when I started getting to like the computer classes where they would teach how to use a computer, what kind of cool stuff you could do with it, how to use Excel. That was very basic. I wanted to do more. So I got into an AP computer science class where they would teach how to use Java. And that was also cool. That was my first step into coding and learning how to do cool things, creating games.
Yeah, and,
But
and
then I went on to do,
Java is not
yeah.
easy. It's a object oriented
Hmm.
language that requires a kind of a mindset to for programming.
Hmm.
Um, Most kids, at least the one that I interact with on a regular basis, they see it's cool. There's a difference between cool and wanting to spend more time and energy. So people think that video games is cool, so they're like they're playing multiplayers and they're spending hours and hours online. But then when it comes to programming and spending the effort and time, because it doesn't give you the same level of dopamine, I would say. It takes so much more effort and it's not instant. In gaming, whatever you put in, you get instant gratification almost. And then with programming, it might take you 50 hours, 100 hours to create a Java program. And then, yes, there is satisfaction at the end of the tunnel, and you definitely feel accomplished. But there's a lot of frustration involved in those, 50 to 100 hours and a lot of difficulty. So the question is, what made you different in the sense that you would take the time and effort and energy to invest in these type of activities, if there is anything?
If it had to be anything, I think it's more that I liked the challenge of having to do all that kind of heavy problem solving and create a hobby and a profession out of banging the keyboard and banging my head against the wall, trying to figure out what I haven't already tried. So a lot of times, especially with now much harder things that I do, like trying to evade CrowdStrike or bypass all kinds of EDRs or security solutions, it's a very, very hard thing to do. And not many people are going to do stuff like create their own entire software or create their own entire malware samples that nobody has seen before. They might do something like take a copy of Cobalt Strike, which, if you don't know, is a very sophisticated kind of command and control piece of software that attackers can use to have a constant connection to a target and to be able to remotely control. So they might take something like that that's been seen 1,000 times by everyone and their mother and do some like series of obfuscations a dozen times over in a way that maybe Defender hasn't seen before it eventually gets caught another 10 minutes later. So instead of doing all that, because it's very tedious and it's always a repetitive process, I found it was a lot cooler and a lot easier to just create the software yourself. I say easier as if creating software is an easy thing to do, but when you put in the effort into learning how very internal things work, like an operating system, like how the Windows API works, like what an API is, how previous malware samples have used the Windows API to execute specific attacks, how they use different languages, like not just C++ or C, but something like NIM or Python or Rust, or doing all these kinds of sophisticated attacks, how they use this code to target specific features of the Windows system, like the LSAS process, which holds all the credentials for every account, or if you're on a domain, using something to target the file called the ntds.dit file, which is like LSAS, but it's a file that has all the credentials for domain accounts. So figuring out how people go about doing this, and not just doing it, but creating things like C2 tunnels or performing exfiltration over different protocols like DNS or through HTTPS, or even using the ping function, which was a really cool thing when I figured out how they were doing that. So doing like really weird things with what you think are very basic features in Windows to be able to get stuff done. Not only combining that with the constant want to do that kind of problem solving, that's what really helps me stay focused, and especially doing the simpler things like not staying in a distracting area, like going somewhere where you're kind of forcing yourself to focus on one thing for a certain amount of time. All those things putting together just really help you set up yourself for success and to be able to learn such really quick things really easily.
Yeah, and coming back to the original statement, question about the whether you should go into cybersecurity in 2024. It's interesting because you notice a lot of people on LinkedIn and other places saying that there's high demands and there's not enough jobs, but it's no one is willing to state in the almost the obvious that maybe it's the reverse is also true, that people are not putting enough effort into their skill set. And I think that there's always going to be a demand for highly qualified individuals that are passionate about their profession and what it is that they do. And AI, for example, is not going to replace creativity anytime soon, which has a lot to do with with the ability to think outside of the box and trying to break stuff. As a defender, that's one of the skill set you need to have.
Right.
And people are, I think we're, as a society, we are, we're being trained to get quick results. It's all about the, hey, how can I get, rich quick? How can I get certified quick? How can I make quick money? How can I advance quickly? I even saw somebody posting, a rant about not being promoted quickly enough. Like it is crazy that we got to the point where we always are outwardly demanding, but then then we're not willing to make the effort to kind of a counter to counter that. So the people that are getting into cyber right now and looking at this, also I would say that there's a lot of different professions within the kind of the cybersecurity industry, and you took a difficult route that requires a lot of training for pen testing, for vulnerability management, for reverse engineering. But there's a lot of other professions, and you can also, because you have the kind of the underlying skill set right now and the knowledge, you can potentially divert into other areas like, product management, product design, architecture. You can start designing products around, cyber. There's a lot of different areas where you can be successful. And I think a lot of people are not aware that these actually exist. When you decided to take on kind of the vulnerability management piece, the looking at reverse engineering malware, did you know there were other types of available, kind of streams for you, or were you directed just because you were taking certain courses in college or in high school and so on?
I did know they exist, and I think the reason I didn't want to go for them is because they didn't feel as involved as I would have wanted to be in the kind of work I was looking to do. So, one very, I won't say non-technical because it is kind of technical, one very nuanced piece of cybersecurity as a career that I tell people if they don't want to do a lot of coding, if they don't want to be entirely technical, if they don't want to have to learn a lot of things and constantly stay up to date, I tell them try to go into vulnerability management because every company needs vulnerability management, whether they want to admit it or not. So to be able to learn how to use tools like Tenable Nessus or Qualys, and to be able to come up to companies and show that not only you know how to use these tools, but you can use your skills to help them save a lot of money on some kind of otherwise difficult remediation tasks or having to do a lot of auditing and see that they're not up to compliance, and then be able to make sure the next time around, since you're on top of their vulnerabilities, you can help them make sure they're a little more compliant than they were the last time, if not fully compliant. So that's a really big part of cybersecurity that I tell people to also go into. If they want to do something that's almost entirely not technical, they're barely staring at a computer, if at all, then try compliance, try GRC. It's going to be a lot of paperwork and it's going to be a lot more people focused because you have to make sure that people are doing the right things that they're supposed to be doing, not just individually, but as a team, as a company, and as a industry mover. You see like big companies like Amazon, like TikTok, they are able to almost effectively break a bunch of laws, it seems like. And because the fines are so relatively minimal to how much revenue they already make, they just see it as like it's a cost they can accept. And for the sake of them continuing to do business, they'll just find a different way of doing what they were doing originally and just pay the fine and assume like nothing happened. Not
Yeah,
everyone can afford to do that.
yeah, absolutely. And another thing is I noticed, William, is that you went through the effort to first of all create like your own website with all your work in there, your projects. You're very involved in the community itself on LinkedIn and so on. So you spend at least a fraction of your time managing your kind of professional portfolio and resume on a regular basis. And it's very impressive because I think anybody who wants to know about you, all they have to do is just Google your name and maybe if come up with some pretty interesting things, like even just maintaining a GitHub account with all your contribution and so on and so on. Again, it's not trivial. And how many people do you know that actually go ahead and do that? Because it takes effort again to maintain it and make sure. When did you decide that this is an important thing for you?
I knew this since effectively the same time as I actually started getting serious about it. I mean, I know that especially when I was working remotely for that security engineering job, I had a few classmates who would sometimes visit me because I would be working inside the college, so I could immediately go from work to course and then back to work, and it would just be a lot easier. So my classmates would see me working, and they'd see that from their perspective, it seemed like I was living the life, right? I was sitting where I wanted to, I was dressing the way I wanted to, and I would just sit in front of a laptop and do what seemed like the easiest work ever. But they don't really see that a lot of me being able to get to that point, what point they thought I was actually at, had a lot of background that I had to build before then. And they didn't see the past 3 years that had helped me get to the point I was at now. So
Yeah,
because,
they consider
yeah,
it overnight success that took you
yeah,
5 years.
yeah, to go back to your point about people saying they want to get rich quick, it's like they just want to have the success without taking on any of the hardship, right? People say they want to be famous, like, I don't know, like David Goggins is a good example. He's reached massive amounts of success, massive amounts of physical health, physical capabilities. He's done unhuman things. He's done very unreal things, and he's become very famous for not just being able to do those things, but for being able to instill those kinds of values that help people better themselves, that help people do a lot of disciplined things to get them to a more disciplined mindset, to help them get out of that whole very dopamine focused kind of mindset. And all that pain, nobody would ever be willing to do that. At least not anyone that isn't like David Goggins, right? He put in a lot of pain, he put in a lot of suffering. He literally cried blood, cried tears, cried sweat to be able to do this, and he'll still do it again the next day. There's not that many people that are willing to put in that massive amount of success. Now to get into cybersecurity, thankfully you won't have to do all that. You'll have to do a lot of effort beforehand before you can get to anywhere that's even remotely the kind of success people dream about. Nobody gets to success overnight. There's always a lot of things you have to do beforehand to be able to set yourself up for that position.
And you also competed with, the National Cyber League competition. You got ranked 1%. Talk to me about, first of all, why did you decide to compete? A lot of people are afraid to compete because they don't want to, experience failure, and it's also hard. Talk to me about the kind of why do you decide to compete? What's the process of potentially, winning such a competition, and why does it matter?
So the National Cyber League from my understanding, it's a very collegiate focused kind of organization. So they target a lot of colleges, especially mine in the CUNY system, which is the City University of New York. They're like an organized New York City conglomerate of colleges that people can go to for a very affordable price. So they'll target them. They may target some private colleges. I don't know too much, but the main point is they made it very accessible for students to be able to test the skills they learn either through a course or through self-learning, like which is a lot of what I've learned now is through self-teaching. And they'll make it very gamey. So it's like if you want to learn about cryptography, they'll set up some challenges to help you understand what kind of hashing algorithms there are, how encryption works, how to break types of encryption, how steganography works. These different kinds of things that if you're just looking at it like you need to learn it, it'll be very boring. But if you have some kind of objective, like you want to win a competition, or you just have some kind of challenge you need to complete, it does it in a way that's very enticing and very activating, stimulating, so that you're very engaged in it. And it's even better because you work as a team. You're not just alone. Maybe you can work alone, I'm not too sure. But when I went into it, there was a college team that was hosted by one of the clubs. And I was a part of that club, not just as like a participant, but actually setting up some of the things and like giving suggestions on what we might want to do to be able to help students learn more actively, help students feel more engaged when they were learning. So that's what really drove me to want to compete, at least in this kind of the NCL. When it got to other things like regular capture the flags or stuff like that, that's when meeting other members of the community came in really helpful because they'll be the ones that actually have the CTF teams, or they'll be the ones that know how to help you set up your own CTF team and to get engaged in these kind of CTF competitions. And in the same way that NCL does it, they do it in a way that's very activating, very fun. They'll set up really unique challenges. They might set it up to reference a lot of things from like Marvel or DC or like some other like Minecraft. They'll make some kind of nuanced way to make it fun, and that's what I really like about it. it's always just a really nice way to test your skills and to be engaged in the community at the same time.
Yeah, and then now you're giving back. You are leading some security workshops, right?
Hmm.
In defensive securities and the latest 2024 hackathon. So, talk to me about the kind of the community overall. This is one aspect of cybersecurity that people are not aware that I think it's really important for us to double click on. The community is wonderful. There's a lot of people that are willing to share. You create friends across continents, across time zones, with people that you work with on a regular basis. The fact of the matter, you can work remotely because a lot of this is just you in front of a computer, and and therefore the community itself can be completely virtual, but there's also the ability to create like real connections over time. Talk to me about your early experience of engaging with the community, and now it is such an early stage you're actually going and giving back.
So the community, rightfully so, is very oriented towards you doing your own thing and like helping you make sure you stay focused on learning your way instead of them just giving you answers to stuff. So the very common phrase people hear when they take the OSCP exam is to try harder. And when they say that, they want you to actively try and figure out the solution yourself, not to constantly rely on other people giving you the solution or just telling you, "Hey, you should do it like this," or "Hey, here's how you get this done." Right? So it's a lot of not just them giving you the opportunities to network with other people, but it's them actually driving you to be able to constantly want to learn more and to constantly have to be engaged in actually learning more on your own and not just being handheld the whole way. If you try to get handheld the whole way through cybersecurity, you're not going to survive. This, I've seen it firsthand. I actually knew a friend who tried to go that route, and he would do things like attend boot camps, go to courses, and he would still, despite his best efforts, no disrespect to him, he was really trying his best. He didn't know how to really he didn't know how to stop being handheld. He didn't know how to use Google, how to do like search engine stuff, how to actually figure out solutions without immediately resorting to ChatGPT or somehow otherwise cheating the process, as you might call it. So being engaged in that community really helps you understand that you need to do things by yourself. You need to not just rely on what other people have done and then hope that they'll be able to help you along the way. And I see this a lot too when I'm in like Discord communities or other like groups of bunch of people like me. Sometimes there'll be new people that join and they'll ask questions like, "Hey, how do I set up this tool?" or "How do I figure this out?" Really easy things that people like us would have been able to just search online and find the answer ourselves in like 2 minutes, right?
But
It's
isn't it? I think the William. I think the education system is partially to blame. I think we're being taught to not to think, but we're being taught like to follow instructions, and then
Mhm.
we're facing sometimes situation where we're there's no path, there's no description in terms of what's next. We're at a loss, and a lot of this, I think, if to rephrase what you mentioned, a lot of it has to do with figuring things out. And problem solving is the underlying key skill set you need to have as a defender.
Mhm.
You have to figure things out on your own, and a lot of people they stumble upon a small difficulty or something they don't know. They take the easy route, which is ask somebody else or trying to figure it out without making the effort. Do you feel that this is something that needs to be addressed at a early age? Because again, it's, I a lot of times with my kids, I say, "Hey, figure it out," because they come over and ask me like a question that I know that can figure it out, and I want them to struggle. And I think a lot of this struggle is not being, you know, applied in the schools. They just don't want the kids to struggle. They say struggling is bad. We don't want them to have issues later on. And I feel it's the opposite. And you encounter it firsthand, like saying, "Hey, why is this person not figuring out? It's not that difficult, not that complicated. It might take them an hour to figure out, but they want to take a shortcut. They want to do it in 30 seconds."
Yeah, sometimes to figure out the things I'm trying to figure out, it takes me days, weeks, even. Yeah, it's not something people want to do. And yes, I think a lot of it has to do with how kind of formal education tries to orient it in a way that's like, we'll teach you this thing, and then you need to memorize it so that we can test you on it again later to make sure you remember it. A lot of it has become more memory based, making sure you remember certain things that you were told maybe a week in advance. And it's a lot less of trying to do critical thinking or trying to do a lot of problem solving outside of, we've taught you a formula, here's how you have to do it using this formula. There's a funny joke I see online, a funny meme where it's like people will say they got the right answer in a math class, but they didn't use the technique the teacher taught them. So the teacher is either confused or they'll say it's wrong, right? It's a lot of very straightforward thinking that doesn't give a
William, by
lot
the
of
way,
room.
they get 100%. They get penalized too. They get
Yeah.
penalized for because they didn't come to the result the particular way that the teacher or
Yeah.
the instructor showed it to them, which is unbelievable. Because I think after a while, you getting your ability to think outside of the box beaten out of you. Like you're if you get penalized over and over and over again by doing things a certain your way, you're gonna stop doing that after a while. You're basically gonna say, hey, like I'm maybe not the right thing, and then you end up like robots, which is really interesting as well because in the age of AI, this one skill set you need to have is the ability to be creative and think outside of the box, which is the exact opposite of what schools are doing.
Definitely. And thankfully, I guess the one reason that helped me kind of stay out of that is because it was just so boring and mind numbing that I felt like I want to teach myself my own things and do my own things when I was outside of the course.
So,
And even
so speaking
even
of
like
your own things, talk to
yeah,
me about about some interesting project you worked on.
sure.
What was the first? I'm sure you remember like the first reverse engineering, like the first project you worked on, maybe like or maybe some pivotal moments where you can say, "Hey, I got this," because as you progress with your experience, right, you gain more confidence in terms of what your abilities are. And do you remember certain pivotal moments where you can say, "Yeah, I'm on the right path. I'm actually pretty good at this. Like this is like a like whoa effect for me." Any stories you can share? Because people remember that.
Definitely. I can talk about especially when I was first actually doing pen testing. So it was my first ever cybersecurity internship was with Accenture. That was like before then I was doing IT work. I would be working in public schools and charter schools, doing things like helping teachers set up a projector or something menial like that. So halfway through that, I was already doing a lot of self-teaching to learn how to use tools like Metasploit, to learn how to set up some kind of security tools, to set up the vulnerable environments to be able to test and figure out what kind of vulnerabilities exist. How do I beat this CTF? How do I figure out how this box was set up? And then how do I write up the process of me figuring that out so I can then save that as a walkthrough for myself to say, yeah, I figured it out. Here's how I did it. Here's how you can recreate it. So the very first box I ever tried to do that on was called, I think it was called Mr. Robot. It was one of the very popular ones that people that write up like the top 10 lists usually set as one of the top 10 to try out. I had no idea what the hell I was doing, like the very first time. I saw a website. I figured, okay, let me guess a password or two. No, nothing happened. And then there was a file I found. I don't know what the hell was going on. So I had to use someone else's walkthrough and figure out what they were doing. The whole time I was reading that, I was so confused because I didn't know what any of these tools were. I didn't know what any of these things meant. I didn't know why he was using these tools. I just figured, okay, he used that, so there's probably a reason for it. So I saw what he did. I recreated his results. I was slowly figuring out why he was doing the things he was doing. And then I figured out, okay, so next time I see this, this is probably one of the things I might want to try. And if this doesn't work, I might look for something similar that might accomplish a similar effect. So then, slowly as I go from one box to maybe five to then 10, after maybe the sixth or eighth box, I start figuring out what I'm doing. And I have what's called a methodology that helps me have a baseline of here's the first things I might want to try. Here's what I figure is best first steps before I do anything more creative or wacky. And then from there, it starts to become more experience, more learning how to tinker, more learning how to problem solve, more learning how to think outside of the box and figure out new solutions. And from there, it just becomes really easy to do. And then after that point, that's when I started getting into the even harder stuff, because at that point I felt like I'd remastered it. I know how to research, I know how to do basic stuff. How do I do things that Defender's not going to catch? How do I do things that the OSCP doesn't test you on? Because when you take the exam, they turn off Windows Defender, they turn off security systems. It's more of like a way to test if you just know how to use the tools, right? So that's what really got me into the even harder stuff like malware development, into reverse engineering, to creating custom exploits, that kind of thing. So that's the really first thing that got me started into this whole conglomerate of what I do now.
And William, somebody with your skill set would probably can make a lot of money on the dark side. Have you ever, you're laughing. Have you ever considered moving, creating some shortcuts? There's a lot of people in Romania, I think, that would probably hire in a heartbeat.
I'm sure everyone has, especially myself at some point. I mean, and I remember even there was another conference I went to, the Cybersecurity Summit. There was a company that was actually making that like part of their presentation. Why there's so many hackers, why there's so many bad actors, and they show like there's a lot of money to be made. There's like all these Telegram chats. There's always these people that have like a bunch of websites they've compromised. They sell in bulk, and then they sell them to people who then just get access to Lockbit, and then they'll dump it onto those websites that have been compromised, or use those websites as proxies to get to bigger websites. It's it's very it's very involved. That's the right word. And I even had a little taste of it when I used to still do things like create cheats for games. Back when I was still in like high school, there would be a game I used to play
It's,
called Team
it's
Fortress 2.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a huge business apparently.
Yeah.
People sell those online, right?
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of it is a lot of the communities especially, they still have that kind of shortcut mindset where they'll take things that have already been built and they'll just try to add their own things or change a couple strings to make it seem like it's theirs, besides like the other 98% that still stays the same. But the thing about it that also scared me away, and the people that at the company that made that presentation also brought this up, is you will get caught. You will not live this lavish lifestyle forever. You will not always have the biggest Rolexes, the Bentley. You will not have that lavish lifestyle. The police will catch up to you. You will get arrested. You will be put into prison for years, and it will not be fun. There's even like the most famous kind of black hats like Kevin Mitnick that get started in this kind of malicious way of using their skills. Eventually they get caught. Or like Frank Abagnale, who has an entire movie about how he used to cheat the FBI, get around them, and constantly evade getting caught. Eventually they get caught, and now they both work for the good guys. They do what they do best now for to benefit the community instead of take away from it.
Yeah, for sure. And Kevin Mitnick just passed away, I believe, last year. And definitely moved to the kind of the light side after years of creating exploit. And he was big into social engineering as well, which is one of the skill set you put on your kind of your CV. Talk to me about specifically how do you convert the theory into practice? I think a lot of people struggle with that. So they'll go out, and you mentioned there's no excuse today. You can create a lab in your home using, relatively speaking, low budget systems There's so many resources available to you, from YouTube to GitHub to there's there's tons, and there's also forums that people share information as well. So there's no excuse. And a lot of people, struggle with the not so much maybe the acquisition of theoretical knowledge, but how do you apply that into actuality? Can you possibly describe how does that work for you? How do you manage to get some of that hands-on experience from things that you've studied maybe in classes, or as you mentioned, watching others do on YouTube?
Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to one suggestion I always give. So people, either students or other people that are beginners in the field, will try to say, yeah, I know I have to do projects. Yeah, I know I have to do this, but what projects do I do? So the answer I usually give is try to find practical problems in your life that you can solve using the skills that you learn or using the kinds of things you want to learn. And this doesn't even have to do with cybersecurity. It could do with something like what I did, which was back in my IT days, I would use Python to automate some of the tasks I had to do. One example that I give is always I had to send emails to parents back at the schools because students would lose access to their accounts, or parents would lose access to the accounts that let them see their students' records. So it would always be the same email over and over and over, just with a different name, with a different email address, with a different code. So instead of constantly sending the same thing, typing the same thing, I use Python to create a script that will take that same email format, send it through a mail server directly to the parent, given two, three variables I want to choose beforehand. And it'll do what would normally take me about a minute to do. It would do it in maybe 10 seconds. And that would shave a lot of time off of doing that one repetitive task because I had automated it. And companies love automation. So if you can talk about how you're able to use Python or use another language to somehow automate something, that's a really big point. And to show that you used it practically in a real world application and not just in like a college pet project is a really big thing. So that's one suggestion I give, to be able to really apply the kind of things you use. And an even more advanced example I might also give is in malware development. You learn how to do basic things if you're in an intro to comp sci class, like how does C++ work, how does memory management work. They don't teach you how to use C++ to take over an entire computer or to dump credentials from it. So being able to use those skills to do real world challenges that people actively try to accomplish is another great way to actually apply your skill set, and then to learn how to not only be able to accomplish it, but then accomplish it when security systems are watching you, and then learn how to evade them.
In your opinion, after all this said and done, is people like yourself working for companies that are looking to better the security posture for that company. Companies spend millions of dollars on software and systems and platforms to automate a lot of security controls, and again to increase the posture and vulnerability, decrease the vulnerability management associated with some of these software. And yet, after all this, we are still being hacked on a regular basis. And you can just go right now and just look up the top latest hacks, and you get a huge list. Why is that? Why are we always in this cat and mouse game? We seems to be always a little slower than the cat.
A lot of it comes down to people not wanting to follow best practices, and also some of it comes from people just not knowing what the next best thing is going to happen or what the next attack is going to be. A lot of it, especially very recently, comes down to social engineering and people being tricked into resetting passwords for accounts, or just straight up handing over account access to someone who pretends just enough to be the guy they're trying to get access to the account of. Or it could just be anyone. And then as soon as they get those credentials, they can then log in and they can then get a bunch of internal access and compromise and internal infrastructure. It's a lot of people not knowing how to do the right thing by not following best practices, not following correct password policies. And I see this a lot in my engagements too, where there will be a team, like an internal team that controls some kind of internal infrastructure, and they have a bunch of Windows systems that are hooked up to very critical infrastructure, like a SCADA system. And they'll have the weakest password policies ever that allow me to create a script that can guess them in about half an hour. And I'll have access to now 4 or 5 different accounts, all with admin access, all that I can use to disable security systems, that I can use to directly control things like water tanks, like turbines, like incinerators, and cause massive amounts of damage, or even just ransomware the entire thing. It's people are reluctant to do what they have to do, and it gives us, well, I say us, like it gives red teamers, or it even gives like threat actors the access they need to be able to take advantage of that laziness, to take advantage of that non-compliance. That's the biggest thing I've seen all the time.
Yeah, and it sounds like most of it boils down to, relatively speaking, simple matter of following best practice. Security hygiene, as you mentioned, password policies one, access control is another, for example. Figure out where the crown jewels are, least privilege, account management. There's so many things that are, relatively speaking, simple but yet hard. If someone who's listening to this podcast is running a small business, a small to medium-sized business, talking to somebody who's a red team, what would be your recommendation? Maybe like 1 or 2 things that can make the most impact for the least amount of effort to secure their organization.
The biggest thing I would say is you are not as small as you think. In fact, a lot of adversaries try to target small businesses because they know that they probably think they're too small to be some kind of target, right? They usually think, oh, they're probably going to go someone like Amazon, or they're going to go for some big person that can give a lot of money. No, they will go for you because they know you still use the router that your internet service provider gave you. They know you still use your home office. Your entire home has been built into an office. You don't put a lot of effort into your security because you think nobody cares about you. People will care about you, and people will take over your stuff. So save yourself the effort of trying to fix it again later, and take it seriously while you still have all your stuff intact.
In what actions can you? In what actions can you take? And I would concur with what you just mentioned, because a lot of times we're a knowledge-based economy, and you can be a small company that has perfected a process for X, and that process took you 25 years to establish, and it's part of it being almost like a trade secret. So you getting that stolen from you, or by a third party, or as you mentioned, accessing the third party using your own system, that's also very high risk. So what recommendation, aside from not using your default router, would you have for these type of organization? What can they do? The couple of steps that they can take to really minimize the ability for someone else to hack and take over their systems?
It's hard to give like a checklist and just call it said and done. Like there'll be things like the NIST best practices thing, or like the some big organization that has said don't do these things, like don't use weak passwords, don't use like that, the easy stuff, right? But the bigger thing I might want to say, or the bigger picture to look at, would be think about and see what other companies have done that have caused them to become compromised, right? And see what flaw they had that you would want to avoid recreating yourself, or inadvertently expose to yourself. Try to see what recent attacks have happened, like social engineering from the help desk, or some guy trying to call to pretend to be someone. Teach your employees how to be able to recognize that. Teach your employees how to recognize email phishing, how to recognize when someone's texting you that's trying to be someone that you're not, or that they're actually not. Try to instill the core values that go into making sure you don't get lazy, making sure you actually stay on top of your security infrastructure, your security posture. Because if they don't, that means they're out of a job, right? Or that means that they now have a lot of their information stolen by some bad actor and is now being sold on some dark web forum or on some Telegram forum, right? Like try to really drive the point home to your employees and even yourself that there's a lot of things you should be doing that you're probably not. And just looking at other people around you, it's very easy to learn from those mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you do for fun when you don't reverse engineer and pen test? What's your hobbies like? Somebody like you.
So half of it is both my profession, and the other half is just the fun stuff. So the fun stuff is I like to play video games sometimes. I'll play Overwatch, I'll play Valorant sometimes. I have a couple of other friends in like the group that we get together for a couple hours and we like to waste time on that game. And the more productive half, I'll call it, is still turning my what would normally be just a profession into an actual hobby. Like I run a Minecraft server. I run my website off of Raspberry Pis, and I'm even looking at them right now. There's a pfSense firewall that I have that gives me like the ultimate control over anything that happens on my network. The internet facing devices that I have, like that Minecraft server and the website, they're all on isolated VLANs in a demilitarized zone so that if somehow someone gets access to these things, which they never will, they won't even be able to get farther than that. They'll never see anything internal, they'll never see anything past those two devices. And it's a lot of learning how to do that, constantly learning new things and doing things like installing Splunk and then being able to take all the traffic that gets forwarded from my intrusion detection system, forwarding all those logs over to Splunk so I can create dashboards like seeing who has attacked me the most time, who is the most jealous that they have no friends to play Minecraft with, so they try to DDoS me, right? That kind of fun stuff that I like to do. That's the way to turn your profession into a hobby, and that's the way I've done it to spend half of my time outside of work.
Well, and William, I still hope you still have some time for playing Overwatch as well every once in a while. So, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you to know more, possibly engage with you on some level, maybe professionally or otherwise? What's the easiest way?
Sure. Outside of my LinkedIn, which is just William Wallace, and you'll see like the red team or malware developer, security researcher title, you can just go directly to my website. It'll be meowmycks.com. It's very easy. It's just my online alias.com. And then all the way at the very bottom, you'll see both a direct email address to contact me with and a actually functioning contact form I built using PHP, uses an SMTP server. It sends it straight to my Gmail address. I'll see it in like maybe a day or two, and I can get back to you.
Do you have the response automated for that form?
Yeah. Oh, the response, no. It sends it to my email, and then I'll get back to you when I see it from you. People usually just take the email address anyway, or they'll contact me through Discord or somehow. But everything's very connected. It's very easy.
William, it's been a real pleasure having you, and I see definitely a bright future. You've done a lot and accomplished quite a bit, and I commend you on the dedication to the profession as well. It seems quite awesome that the amount of stuff that you've accomplished in such a relatively short time, and looking forward to seeing where you go next. Maybe we'll do this every couple of years, and we'll catch up on your achievement. And until then, thank you very much for joining all, and I'll see you next time in the next episode. Stay safe online as well as offline.
Thanks a lot, guys. I'm only just getting started.
See you soon.